here's your host, Joe Matthew.
Charlie, thank you. Reminded that lawmakers are back in town by the traffic jams and lack of parking here in the nation's capital. It does make it a nicer place to be, more active. School buses are rolling again. Everybody's back to school and work, and now something needs to happen. The question is what? We talked yesterday about renewing FISA. This is the warrantless spying program, specifically 702 here, that may or may not be addressed in the next 2 weeks, and then it's back on recess. And at some point, a vote on Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and that is what could trigger the motion to vacate. It's already been written by Marjorie Taylor Greene. You probably don't need me to tell you that. But the fact that everybody's back from Easter recess now has all of this stuff churning, and just in time, also returning from his own international tour, is our friend Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence, with us right now, of course, senior U.S. policy analyst. Welcome back. It's good to see you.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Back stateside in time for the good weather. You're not running odds on a motion to vacate, are you?
No.
Would that even be possible? Do the calculators work that way?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, look, it can happen. It cannot happen.
Yeah.
I mean, but people need to prepare for that eventuality, because there is a real risk that, that the Democrats will vote to vacate, like they did under the Kevin McCarthy scenario. And then we would have to go back through several weeks of trying to figure out who the next Speaker of the House is. But in terms of trying to figure out, how does this impact the markets over the next few weeks and stuff, we're telling folks, just remember, when Speaker Johnson said over break that he was going to work on Ukraine right away in Washington doesn't mean this week. It
might
could
mean a couple of months even, right?
Exactly. And so what Speaker Johnson is trying to do right now is just trying to figure out a path, the best path for him to move forward. We are cautiously optimistic that Ukraine aid will get done. Now, what does that look like? Well, it could be the zero interest loan that President Trump has floated. It could include the repo, the Repo Act, which is collecting the monies that have been taken from Russian oligarchs and so forth. All of this for the defense contracting industry means that we do think aid over the next few months or years will eventually come in to them. But how does that work out, and how does it work with the politics of the Speaker and the motion to vacate? Still to be determined.
We're just talking to Enda Curran, our colleague at Bloomberg Economics, about the race to rearm, that this global effort to increase defense spending is very real. It's not just here in the U.S. What does it mean for, and what are your clients asking you about defense stocks, which we talk about quite a bit because they've been looking pretty good. Even Raytheon seems to have, RTX, come back to life. I think General Dynamics was near an all-time high. Lockheed's had a few problems of its own, but it's been kind of hanging in there waiting for something to happen. Now that we've funded the government through the end of the year, is the Ukraine money the next thing that investors are waiting on?
I think so. My colleague Will Lee has a great note out there talking about the Ukraine aid and how if it comes through, say around that $40 to $60 billion level, you're looking at around 1% to 2% incremental gains over the next few years, specifically because of that. So when it comes to the defense stocks, you have obviously the U.S. aid, that is a dollar amount that we're looking to see in the passage this year. But then you have other, just like this general uncertainty going across the globe, which is also weighing on the defense contractors. It's a little bit harder to quantify, and my colleagues have been doing a lot of work on this, but it's not in terms of actionable that we can say that this piece of legislation is going to take place at this time. So, but what we can say is that the big scary event for the defense contractors, the sequester, is gone.
Yes.
There is certainty that we know how the funding is going to play out through the rest of the year. We don't anticipate that a funding bill will come in September 30th, so look for a CR to kick the can into 2025. So at least when it comes to the U.S. actions that impact these defense contractors, we sort of know what the level playing field or what the playing field will be for the next 18 months.
So there's certainly less uncertainty, as you've illustrated. That's $60 billion for Ukraine that would largely go to these companies that I just mentioned. Is Wall Street assuming that's going to happen? Is that why they've been holding up pretty well?
I think most of Wall Street thinks that some form of Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan aid will go through.
Yeah.
You have, you think about it. If I were to give truth serum to people up on Capitol Hill, I'd say about 90% of them would vote for this and just be done with it. You have,
90%?
You have folks like, Senator Mitch McConnell who said we're going to get this done. You've had Speaker Johnson say that we're going to do something. The question is, what is that something, and how do you do it with the politics of this motion to vacate? vacate. And that's why I don't think it's going to happen very soon, is because I think Speaker Johnson spent the last 2 weeks floating ideas with his allies. Okay, what if we proceed with the Donald Trump idea of zero interest loans?
Yeah.
Could we get him supportive of this idea to placate to the MTG and the motion to vacate? He said that he was texting with Matt Gaetz. The question here is that like, he's just looking for options.
Sure.
I think Wall Street thinks that some type of option will come through and this will get done.
You mentioned the Repo Act. Is that a sweetener for conservative Republicans? And could that, in fact, mean much more money going to defense? It's a potential $300 billion haul we're looking at there, right? But we'd have to have a lot of other countries sign off on it.
That's right. I mean, so this act would reclaim Russian money or money that was from oligarchs and give it to Ukraine. Now, there's two things here. One, you mentioned $300 billion. The majority of that is in Europe.
That's right.
In the United States, it's around $8 to $10 billion, which, look, if you're trying to get to $43 billion, that's a nice pay for.
Yes, indeed.
But the other thing is, and Senator Vance even just mentioned it today in the Senate Banking Committee hearing on illicit finance, was you could potentially be taking away a tool that the president could use in negotiations. And so if you put this into law, are you sort of handcuffing the president in terms of negotiating?
You mean ceasefire negotiations?
Correct.
Endgame in Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
So, if Senator Vance is saying, I'm not entirely sure that I want to use this money for Ukraine, there are probably other people thinking that as well.
What's the chip you're playing in that act, though? Is that giving it back to Russia or using it to rebuild Ukraine?
I think most people would use it to rebuild Ukraine. I'm not saying that you would give it back, but
Sure.
You certainly don't want to take away powers from the president when they are trying to negotiate, macro level ceasefires and so forth like that.
We're talking with Nathan Dean at Bloomberg Intelligence, and a really important update on a story that was something you spent a lot of time on. We spoke about last time, this new limit on credit card fees. This is late fees. A very familiar name in the U.S. Senate, Tim Scott, is working to repeal this new $8 cap. Is this just good politics, or could this be turned around? We're talking about the Congressional Review Act, if I'm reading this right. How does that apply here?
Yeah, so, Congress has the ability to overturn regulations that have been occurred within the last 60 legislative days. Now, we've actually gotten some client interest on this, but what I'm telling my clients is, remember, you need President Biden to sign this, and he's not going to sign a law that, is something that's repealing one of the big, regulations. So? I mean, and, this is something that requires a majority vote in the Senate, majority vote in the House. Let's say, because obviously in the House, you only have one right now, but let's say it gets through the House. And let's say you potentially get Senator Manchin or somebody to go on board with this. He hasn't said anything to this point, but, let's say it gets through the Senate, President Biden can always just come in and veto. Our stance with the credit card late fee is, if you're following the court cases, and this has been kind of a little interesting here, is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and a bunch of other folks have sued in the Fifth Circuit in Texas. Now, one of the judges down there said, you're sort of shopping here. Most of these folks aren't in the Fifth Circuit.
Right.
Send it to Washington. The Fifth Circuit actually appealed. There was an appeal. The Fifth Circuit said, no, bring it back. So there's a lot of court cases that are going on. And ultimately, we do think the CFPB could have a challenge with this. My colleague Elliot Stein's covering all of this.
Incredible. This is billions of dollars we're talking about for the banks here.
Absolutely. I mean, we're talking, right now the average late fee is around $30 to $32. It goes down to $8.
Amazing.
This is applicable to banks that are just 10 billion assets and up. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, a lot of these late fees have actually begun to decline. There have been banks out there like Capital One and Bank of America have said, look, we've actually taken these down to the cost of doing business. And I don't think the CFPB would be too upset. Now, they don't think the cost of business is $8.
Right.
But in the comment letters that have been going out in terms of the American Banking Association and some of the other banking trades, is they've essentially said, look, with these caps, you're sort of breaking the law here. And to me, that just says we're going to continue with the lawsuits. We'll see you in the Fifth Circuit. We'll see you at the Supreme Court. And we feel pretty good about our chances.
Great information here. So Tim Scott raises money and lobbyists make a lot in the process.
Well, look, you got to try. I mean, you can't just, to Tim Scott's defense, you're going to put up the bill even if you know that it's going to fail, just because you have to do it. And if you don't, you're seen not trying.
The lobbyists have been busy since we last spoke on this, or you saw this challenge coming?
I mean, they've been trying this with pretty much all of the CFPB regulations, SEC regulations. Yep. The SEC has a climate change disclosure rule that's currently in the courts. The SEC stopped that. But, I wouldn't be surprised if the repeal, I think the repeal already went, the ball is rolling on that repeal as well. Again, President Biden's not going to sign it. So you have to look into the courts and see how this is going to play out.
I can only imagine your email and your voicemail when you come back from a week off. Like, I mean, it's just, are you still digging through it? The client, do you tell the clients to call someone else?
Nope.
Wow.
We've been reading, we were reading a lot of.
You're taking the calls on Honey. I'm just gonna quick. Thank you. Great to see you. Thank you for coming back. Nathan Dean, Bloomberg Intelligence on Balance of Power.